Welcome back to our lecture in which I introduce you to human resource management and work analysis. In this section, you will learn the fundamentals of the first HRM function, work analysis. Let me start with a question. Have you ever had to write a job description? If you have, I'm sure you would testify that it's a very difficult task. If you have not, you would probably puzzle where to start. Recent survey results show that the majority of managers, when required to develop a job description, find the assignment very challenging. The key challenges are how to accurately describe the job duties, how to identify the duties that are essential as opposed to just nice to have, and how to identify the necessary interpersonal skills. More generally, how do you know who to recruit, who to hire? Who is underperforming? Who is performing well? What do your employees' training needs? Which behaviors to reward and which to discourage? In order to provide answers to all these questions, you must establish what it is that you need employees to do. Without knowing what workers are supposed to be doing, it's impossible to identify who the best person is for the job, or to identify who is underperforming, who is performing well, who you should train, and for what, and so forth. And in order to establish what you need employees to do and what behaviors you want them to exhibit, you need to systematically investigate and identify what activities they're expected to perform, and in what context, and what attributes they should possess to perform these. In other words, you need to undertake work analysis. So let's examine more closely what work analysis entails. The 4 questions we will ask and answer are: why? What is the purpose of work analysis? What data on the various aspects of work and worker you need to collect? Who? What are the sources of the data? Who can tell you what the work does and should entail? And finally, how? What methods you should use to collect the data? Let's start with the why. The standard outcomes of work analysis are job or role description. This defines the job or role in terms of its task requirements, such as the procedures, methods, and standards of performance. And also job or role or person specification. This defines the job or role in terms of behaviors, knowledge, abilities, skills, and other personal characteristics that are required for a person to be able to do the job. What do we use this for normally? Job adverts, of course. You need to recruit someone, and so you need to advertise using a job description and person specification. So, we need work analysis for recruitment. Yes, to recruit the right people. However, we also need a clear understanding of the job for various other purposes. For example, for selection among the job applicants that you have attracted through your recruitment campaign. We need work analysis to evaluate performance and to identify and retain top performance, as well as to identify and manage poor performance. We need work analysis to identify the training gaps and to create motivating career paths. We need work analysis to develop succession plans, to develop fair and equitable reward systems, and to ensure health and safety and regulatory compliance. In other words, absolutely every aspect of HRM requires the input from work analysis. But what exactly do you need to know about a job? What you need to know is what activities the work entails, what are the broader responsibilities, and what are the specific tasks that comprise the work role. You also need to know what knowledge, skills, abilities, and other personal characteristics, say educational credentials or professional certification or particular attitudes that a person needs to have to perform the work successfully. And you also need to know the specific task, social and physical context in which the work is performed. But where do you get the information about what the work entails? What worker attributes are required and what the work context is? That's the question of sources. Who are your sources? Who can tell you what the work does and should entail? Who can provide information on the relevant knowledge, skills, and abilities? The most obvious and frequently used source is job incumbents, and with a good reason. People who actually do the job on a day-to-day basis usually possess the most accurate and complete knowledge of the work itself, as it is actually performed. This is especially true when work is unobservable, as is the case with, say, knowledge work. To put it simply, when work actually happens in a person's head, any external observer, be it a job analyst or a supervisor, will have a difficult time understanding and making judgments about work tasks or activities. But even in the situation where there is no obvious reason to include job incumbent as a source, for example, if the job is not complex and it's easy to see and record everything the person is doing, even in those situations, soliciting information from job incumbents is very worthwhile. Why? Well, in order to get a buy-in. Because when incumbents believe they had a voice in the work analysis process, they will be more likely to accept subsequent changes that occur as a result of the analysis. Which incumbents to choose? Here are the 3 pieces of advice. Firstly, do not focus exclusively on top performers. Of course, it is not unreasonable to expect the top performing incumbents to possess the most complete knowledge of the work. However, just because a person can perform a job exceptionally well doesn't mean he or she will be able to describe the work with the same level of expertise. In addition, when the intention of the work analysis is to determine what is required of the worker for adequate performance, collecting information solely from top performers risks overestimating the requirements of a job. Another piece of advice is don't focus only on the more experienced incumbents. Although the logic that people who have done the job the longest will also know the job the best is intuitively appealing, the reality is usually more complicated. To illustrate, researchers who studied police officers found that the more experienced and the less experienced officers reported spending the majority of their time on very different activities. More experienced officers focused more on non-criminal interventions, court-related activities, and first aid. In contrast, less experienced officers reported being more involved in basic criminal interventions, sweeps, and raids. In some jobs, it may be that workers with more experience are afforded more discretion regarding what tasks they choose to focus on, whereas less experienced workers are left to do the less desirable tasks. So what's the solution? You need to include incumbents with varied experience levels. And finally, a word of caution. Although incumbents' direct experience with day-to-day work makes them excellent sources of task information, the same may not be true when it comes to the information about knowledge, skills, and abilities required to perform the work. Why? Well, because describing personal attributes needed to perform work successfully requires to make more abstract judgments than simply describing the tasks and activities that the person performs at work. And when incumbents do make judgments about the required knowledge, skills, and abilities, they tend to rate themselves rather than the work, and tend to inflate the ratings in order to paint themselves in a better light. Ability ratings are likely to be most inflated when the incumbent perceives some benefit to making a good impression, for example, when work analysis information is collected to determine compensation on or where there is a perceived threat of downsizing. Now, what are the other sources? Another useful source of work information is the incumbent's immediate supervisor. Supervisors may be a preferable information source compared to incumbents in those situations when incumbents lack verbal ability to accurately describe their work, or if the incumbent turnover is very high. Supervisors are also a better source than incumbents on the matter of knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes for the job. This is because supervisors typically have observed a number of individuals performing the work and will have insight regarding knowledge, skills, and abilities that enable individuals to perform the work effectively. And of course, supervisors would be less likely to inflate the knowledge, skills, and ability requirements of the job than the incumbents. However, in practical terms, collecting work information from supervisors may be a considerable burden for the organization because supervisors' time comes at a serious cost. As a result, supervisors are usually involved in the work analysis process at the very end, after the information has been collected from all other sources, and they serve primarily to verify the completeness and relevance of the information. And of course, supervisors may not be very knowledgeable in cases when they supervise many different jobs, or when the work is very complex and when the majority of work activities are not directly observable. All in all, information collected from supervisors tends to be most useful when it is collected to supplement information from other sources rather than as an exclusive source of work information. The third useful source of information is subject matter experts. Now, who are the subject matter experts? Of course, both job incumbents and supervisors can be called subject matter experts, and rightly so. However, they are not the only experts. For example, if you're creating a job that didn't exist before, or looking to improve some aspects of the job, you might call on someone else with an expertise in the area. Someone who's not a supervisor or an incumbent, but could be, say, an academic working in this area, an engineer who has produced a piece of equipment that worker needs to operate as part of the job, an ergonomics expert, or a training consultant. The fourth source of data for work analysis is records. What do we mean by records? We mean any relevant organizational information that exists in the documents. This includes obviously any previous job descriptions for this job, if such exists, but also organizational charts, standard operating procedure manuals, employee handbooks, and any other documents that can provide information on the job being analyzed. Your fifth source is trained work analysts, that is to say, professionals whose job it is to conduct work analysis. Trained work analysts are well suited to provide objective and valid work information because they have education and experience in work analysis, and also because of their outsider status. Trained analysts are familiar with the language of work analysis instruments and the process of rating various aspects of work. This is particularly true when it comes to judging knowledge, skills, abilities, and other requirements to perform the tasks. Another situation in which it is useful to enlist trained analysts is when information about the context in which work is performed needs to be included in the analysis. Organizational members, job incumbents and supervisors alike, often become so used to their work environment over the time that they fail to notice things that an outsider would easily spot. Professional analysts will be familiar with a wide range of working conditions and can draw more accurate conclusions about the demands of a particular work context. One study, for example, recounts the story of a work analyst who asked job incumbents about the level of noise they experienced when working in the engine room of a ship. The job incumbent said that the noise was not too bad, but the analyst who visited the engine room and was able to compare it with the noise level of other work environments came to the conclusion that the noise level was exceptionally high and that the working conditions in that engine room were indeed extreme. Last but not least, in terms of the advantages of using trained analysts, these analysts are skilled individuals and it's their job to perform work analysis. Therefore, they will be motivated to provide accurate and comprehensive work information, unlike other sources who ask to take time away from their primary assignment to participate in the analysis. However, the outsider status means that the analyst's initial knowledge of the work will be severely limited, and so the analyst must first familiarize themselves with the work to be analyzed, and in most cases this means considerable time spent conducting interviews and observing, and this also means considerable cost and burden for the organization. Still, prevailing research suggests that these costs are worthy ones. Yet another source of information for work analysis is other organizational members. It is a tried but true observation that work is becoming increasingly boundaryless. Many job assignments now blur the boundaries between different jobs and require substantial interaction and cooperation between members of different teams or divisions. Where work activities of one employee have direct impact on the activities of other employees, it becomes imperative to involve these others into work analysis. Moreover, it may be the case that the interaction with other organizational members themselves constitute essential work activity and require knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes to perform it. One approach to ensuring that all relevant sources of information are included is called the 360 degrees approach. In this approach, once all major job functions have been identified through work analysis, the recipients of those functions are then identified and used as additional sources of information for work analysis. And these recipients may include not only individuals within the organization, but also external stakeholders. So we move on to the last but not least source of information for work analysis, customers and clients. Customers and clients, because they're ultimately impacted by the work, can provide a unique perspective on how work should be done, which aspects are critical, which are not, and the like. Moreover, customers tend to directly benefit from any improvements resulting from analysis, and so they may be motivated to provide accurate and useful information, particularly when the goals of the work analysis include establishing standards for performance or identifying tasks that should be performed by the worker but currently are not performed. One work analysis study collected information about the work of writing police reports from two sources: police personnel who worked the reports and district attorneys who were the end users of these reports. The researchers found that police reported both grammar and content being important aspects of report writing, but attorneys rated the importance of grammar as much lower than the content. In a situation such as this one, ignoring the end-user perspective could result in training or performance interventions that are centered around the aspects of the work that have very little impact on or value for those who ultimately use the work products. In retail and services, it is, of course, particularly recommended to use mystery shoppers or customer focus groups. And to complete the picture, needless to say, but I'll say it nevertheless, customers and clients should only be asked to provide information regarding aspects of the work about which they have sufficient knowledge. So, that's the who. Now let's tackle the how. The who is obviously related to the how of work analysis. How do you gather the information from all these different sources? Observations, interviews, and surveys are the big three of data collection. Observation means that someone not involved in the task performance, a supervisor or job analyst, observes an individual as they complete their tasks, and then records using notes or checklists various aspects of the work. There are, of course, variations of the theme. For example, for hazardous jobs where observing may be dangerous, one may create video recording. You can also observe work samples, that is to say, small segments of the total job that represent the typical tasks. Or you can observe critical incidents, recording particularly effective or ineffective behaviors. You can also find the information through interviews, either individual or panel interviews. In an individual interview, respondents, such as workers or their supervisors, are interviewed one at a time and asked similar types of questions about the work. In a panel interview, a number of workers, supervisors, or technical experts are gathered together to discuss various aspects of the work, and such meetings are usually facilitated by a job analyst. You can also construct a survey that may be paper and pencil or computer-based and administer a questionnaire to workers, supervisors, and technical experts. Finally, you can do documentary research, data mining the existing records such as current job descriptions, organizational charts, training manuals, and so forth to get a sense of how the job is structured. So we now know the key aspects of work analysis, and from this, I'm sure you have figured that work analysis is rather complex and costly process. So any help you can get and any way you can make the process cheaper, easier, more efficient would of course be welcome. And that's where the ONET Online comes to your rescue. What is it? Well, we will discover in the fifth and final part of this lecture. So when you're ready, move on to your next recording. Thank you.